Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the group editor licensing at IDW, working on the Star Trek line at the publisher, as well as overseeing other licenses at the publisher. It's Heather Antos. Thanks for coming on, Heather.
Thanks for having me, David. Real excited to be here.
So we're recording this on Wednesday, June 25th. It is New Comic Book Day. I don't think you have any releases.
No.
But how's the day going for you?
Pretty good. It's actually been a lot of Zooms, a lot of this. So right before this, I actually took a half-hour break. I had a half-hour break in between Zooms where I just kind of laid in my dark bedroom to clear the palate.
Sometimes you got to do that, right? Sometimes you got to take a moment for yourself where you're like, all right, I'm Zoom free. Time to find my center once again.
Yeah, just turn the brain off.
So you're in New Jersey. IDW is in San Diego. I have to assume you're full remote?
Yes. No, that commute would be brutal. Can you imagine? No, yeah. So the company is actually a fully remote company now. Our main office is in LA. It shifted during COVID. The main office used to be in San Diego, but there was an LA office. But then during the pandemic, people moved down to LA or up to LA, technically, and new hires, yada, yada, yada. And so the main office is now LA, but we have folks in Nashville and North Carolina, Long Island, Las Vegas, Portland, we're all over the place. So, yeah.
I think we just kind of covered the good part and the bad part of Zoom, right? Which is the good part is you can work from anywhere. The bad part is you're always on Zooms.
Always on Zoom. Yep.
You're primarily an editor by trade, which means that to varying degrees, your work life is less editing and more firefighting, I imagine, to some degree. Is it possible for you to even say what an average day is like for you? Does such a thing exist?
I love that you say firefighting. I often call making comics trench warfare.
Oh, that's fair too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very apropos comparison. The typical day is just figuring out what fires I'm putting out, right? Figuring out the priorities of the day, whether that is, the book that goes to print this week specifically, or the book that I have to get to the licensor this week so that way it can go to print next week, or what solicits are due, or what artist is behind, or what script notes I need read, or I need a pitch in by this date if I want an on sale of, 9 months from now, right? All the various factors. My life is just a bunch of lists, really. It's just a bunch of lists.
I think that's one of the things that's interesting about the life of an editor. It's true for all professions to some degree, even in comics. As much as we want to think of writers or artists as just writers or artists, a lot of it is answering email, doing press stuff, talking, if you're doing creator-owned, there's the small business aspect of that. But for you, it's we want to act like it's all casting and brainstorming and all the fun stuff that you really want to do. But a lot of it is Paramount emailed me and they need an answer in 3 hours. So I have to do the thing that they've asked for. And I did not expect that today. So that is where I think the firefighting and trench warfare comes in, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm literally currently trying to figure out what cover image of Captain Kirk that my contact at Paramount is referring to. I got an email not too long before we started recording this, where it's there was a cover that came out recently that had a very good image of Kirk in it. Do you know which one I'm talking about? And it's sure, let me just, so I'm literally was it this one? Was it this one? Was it this? So that's what I'm currently doing. If you really want to know what a day in the life is like.
It's in traditional office life, there's always the other jobs as assigned part of the job.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like an editor's life is just other jobs as assigned.
Other jobs as assigned. It's a bunch of soft skills, right? Trying to describe what it is that I do. It is very nuanced. It's, personality management, people management, therapy, a lot of therapy for people. And, it's chess. It's a lot of chess. It's a lot of figuring out, the nuance of how do I get a licensor to think that what I want to do was their idea, or was their, or with my bosses, right? Back and forth. It's that middleman constantly. And how I'm going to pitch something to Paramount is very different than how I'm going to pitch something to say Sega. That's very different than how I'm going to pitch something to my editor-in-chief versus my publisher versus my sales team, right? It's figuring out positioning every person's individual needs and fears and how to assuage and communicate the best to everyone's needs.
And how to get Paramount people to remember Malachi Ward's name.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I have no idea if that's the cover they're referring to, because you don't either.
I think it is. That's literally the last one I just sent. I'm pretty sure it's the Malachi Ward one, but we'll see.
I have to say, complete aside before we get into the rest of the podcast, but I don't think I ever imagined Malachi Ward doing Star Trek covers. He does some amazing Star Trek covers.
He's done a ton for me. Yeah. And I can't remember how that first happened because I've been working with Malachi Ward on Star Trek covers since almost the beginning of my time on the books. And I can't remember if it's he just reached out to me that he was interested or I was just a fan and was thinking like, I need something super surreal. But he does likenesses really well too. Like he does the surrealness, the stuff that we get with Black Hammer, very, very well. And then, we just got this beautiful Shatner likeness and the last Starship piece that we just revealed last week. So he's great.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking off to the side to see if I have his book Ancestor. I don't know if you've ever read that. Great book. And it is funny though. Like, I think that's one of the interesting sides of like the casting part of the job, which for listeners that don't know, casting is where like an editor finds the people who will do the job and fit the job best. So like, for example, you did like when Lower Decks was launching, you had Ryan North and Derek Charm, like the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, the second team after Erica left on that book. And that's like perfect. That makes sense. Malachi Ward didn't make sense, but it was kind of in a way where it's like, I imagine part of the job when you're doing casting is you want to find those ones where it's like, I wouldn't expect this, but it works perfectly.
That's kind of, honestly, especially with Jackson and Colin, because I've been working with those two as writers.
Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly?
Yes, yeah. I've been working with those two, since my Valiant days. And whenever I'm working on a new project and I have the writers locked, but we might still be casting artists, I usually do a vibe check with the writers. I'm like, who are we thinking? What are we feeling? Yada, yada, yada. And they'll throw a list of names to me. And, for Harbinger, for instance, they really wanted someone like Derek Robertson, a Jace, or if not Derek Robertson.
Yeah.
Wouldn't we all? And I was like, that's cool. Robbie Rodriguez, and who could not be in the same school of thought as Derek Robertson. But for what I was envisioning for this book and this character and the story we were telling, like it just really hit my gut instinct. And, I think Jack and Colin were just very much like, no, please don't, blah, blah, blah. And then Robbie starts turning in concepts and covers and layouts and everything. And Jack and Colin are just like, you know what? You're right. 100% right. The same thing happened with them on Star Trek. Nick Robles was like their ideal, which I did reach out to Nick and I spoke with Nick, and Nick was just, I'm unfamiliar with Star Trek. That's a big undertaking. I'm very, thanks, but no thanks. I knew Ramon Rosales was a huge Star Trek fan, and I reached out. Jack and Colin, same thing. They're like, we're not really sure, like blah, 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 whatever. And then Ramon starts turning in pages and they're like, all right, you're right. So I now have a thing with them where I'm just like, you can't
Give me a
tell
shot.
me I'm wrong. Yep. You just gotta let me.
You were out twice and you're in immediately as soon as you saw pages both times. So give me credit. Yeah.
Yep.
That makes sense. It is funny though, because like sometimes it's like incongruous in your head. I just assume though, most of the time it's just like Declan Shalvey emailing you, be like, can I draw Star Trek stuff all the time?
Yeah.
Because I know you worked on with like Old Dog and Bog Bodies. Actually, fun fact, you and I share a credit. You were one of two guests I've ever had that shared a credit. We both worked on Old Dog Dossier.
Yes, we did.
And so you worked with him, and I know he's like, I mean, I've seen pictures of him in Federation uniforms. Yes. So I just imagine he's always like, can I draw a cover?
He was one where when I took over the license, I was shocked he actually wasn't immediately like, Heather, when are you in? Because I've known Deck since even before my Marvel days. Like Deck and I go way, way back. But I gave him something like right off the bat in Star Trek 400. It was like, I have to give Declan something right away, because if I don't, I will never hear the end of it.
He wanted you to come to him too, probably. Oh, Declan.
Probably. I've been in his house. I've seen his shelves of all the Federation ships and everything. Like, but yeah,
He doesn't hide it very well. He's a bit of a fan.
he's a little bit.
Well, let's talk about your background. You mentioned how you've known Declan for a while. That is not the direction I'm going. I do actually want to start with kind of, with first-time guests. I actually just want to start where your relationship with comics started. And from what I understand, you started with comic strips, right?
Yeah. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Michigan where we didn't have a local comic shop. Like superhero comics weren't a thing in my, periphery growing up, but we did have the Sunday comic section of the big newspaper that we got every week. And me and my two siblings, we would absolutely fight over it, to read Kathy and Dilbert. Love those office comedies as 7-year-olds.
Oh, yeah. That's one of my favorite parts about comic strips is like, do you know what Bloom County is?
Oh, I love penguins. Penguins are like my thing. So
oh yeah, there you go. Opus is your guy. But I absolutely love Bloom County. But I only realized like a decade afterwards that I understood like 12% of that comic strip. It was all about like 80s politics stuff, and I'm just like, what is happening? I'm like, I just like it. It's got a penguin and a cat.
It's a little penguin, yeah.
Yeah, the cat's like totally weird. I love cats. I love penguins. What's not to like? But same with Dilbert. It's like I read that and I was just like, I don't have any office experience. I'm 6. I don't know what this is, but I'm like, but I know I like it. And that's what matters. But you didn't start reading comic books until high school, from what I understand. It started with like Sandman and Hellblazer.
Yeah.
What was it about comics that spoke to you when you first started reading them? Was there something that really stood out about the medium?
Yeah. So my mom would say I made my own comics before I knew what comics were. I have been writing and drawing my own stories since I was a little kid. The library was my favorite place in the world, and they did all these like competitions, for kids, and I would write and illustrate my own stories and all the time for them. And so I took an American literature class, and in that we studied things like Sandman and, Constantine was in that, and Mouse, and, just a lot of the classic, more literary comics. And I thought there was something really interesting about the visual narrative and control an artist and writer really have with comics in a way that, like, I don't think even like cinematography and like film necessarily even have the same amount of control that comics do. Because comics, we have the element of the page turn and the reveal and the splash page, and you can change, in film, you can zoom in and zoom out, sure, but the screen is all the same the whole way through. And in comics, you can have double page spreads, you can have splash pages, you can have, half splash quarters, you can be really creative with the panel layouts. Like, really, honestly, Sandman, I know everyone says this, but Sandman and that first volume in particular really, for me, showed me what comics could be, from just all the intricate panel designs that J.H. Williams, Sam Keith, like all those great artists in that run would do, as well as the ability to introduce these characters that seemingly have nothing to do with one another, right? But over time, interweave their stories in a way that affect each other that only you, the reader, are able to follow and understand and know.
Yeah.
And it's done so well that I wanted to do that. I wanted to figure out how to do that. And that's what really captured me.
I'd never really thought about the screen as a limiting factor when it comes to like movies and TV shows and everything like that. But it is funny. I was reading the most recent issue of Absolute Batman, where Scott Snyder and Nick Dragotta were doing. It's like the issue feels very manga influenced, which makes sense because it's Dragotta and he's got this very heavy manga influence. But like, some of these pages have like probably 20 panels on them, and there's just like this incredible density to it. It's amazing you can do that, but then you can also like read another comic that's just like a splash, like just a series of splashes, and it makes sense because you can just, I don't know. I mean, the long standing thing that people will say is like the only budget to a comic is like your imagination, basically. I'm sure as an editor, you would probably disagree, at least to some degree, because time is a factor you have to.
Time is absolutely a factor, 100%.
Yeah. But I mean, at the same time, though, is like, I think that, you talk about all those comics, you're talking about like, Hellblazer and Mouse, and you talk about Absolute Batman, and you talk about, I don't know what else, something that uses a bunch of splash pages. All of those do like kind of exemplify how different the medium can be depending on what you pick up and what you're interested in.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that I think is the magic of this medium. There really is nothing else quite like it. And I think that's another really cool thing is being an editor. I've worked with the same creators, time and time again on different phases of their career, different properties, creator owned, IP, Marvel, Star Trek, Valiant, what have you. And you can pitch the same high concept to, three different creative teams, and you're going to get three entirely different stories that look nothing alike.
Yeah.
And that is so cool.
I mean, that's a strength. I think sometimes people act like the fact that there's like inconsistencies sometimes depending on what an artist does. But I mean, you look at different books and sometimes you get the right fill-in artist for a book and it just like makes that arc pop in a different way that the other one didn't. And I think that's a strength more than it's a weakness. But so you've been working in comics. It seems like it started 11 years ago, but it was 10 years ago is when you started with Marvel. It's kind of your 10th anniversary in that regard.
Yeah.
Do you feel like working in comics has shifted what you love about them or what you appreciate about them because you have to do it in a different way now?
I don't think so. I think it's made me appreciate what I love about it even more. I come from theater and film previous to comics, and I say this all the time, comics are a team sport, and like theater and film are a team sport as well.
Yeah.
We're all collectively working together on a deadline with a budget to make, alchemy happen on a page. And there's such an energy to that I really love. I love the improvisation that is forced upon us in every single project. I love that. I love feeding off of the different creative energies that you get within a project. I love the chaos that comes up and suddenly we have problems to solve. Like, I love that. I'm a crazy person that loves the chaos, but I think that's why being an editor is the perfect job for me because, I'm definitely the person that in the face of chaos, I'm a person of action. I don't panic. I'm like, great, this is a new element. Let's figure this out. And it's exciting to me.
Yeah. Well, man, it seems like you're good at the trench warfare part of it, which is not something probably everyone always takes to. But it also seems like, I mean, you mentioned you had a theater and film background. I know you went to Eastern Michigan University for, studying electronic media and film. So you have that specifically. It kind of seems like you've faded might be a strong word, but you've always been interested in story as like kind of a focus for you.
Yeah, no, 100%. Story has always been the focus, whether it was drawing my children's book as a child, whether it was, writing fan fiction on the internet, whether it was participating, in the 4 online RPG forums as a teenager and in the early 2000s, theater and film. And, I've always really been just drawn to story and how it connects us as in culture and humanity. I find it so powerful that you can have a single story, like you can have, a single character that millions of people around the world feel connected to. And there's something really sacred about that. And I think it's really powerful and interesting and cool. And to be a part of telling those stories and shaping those characters in some part way is like such an honor to get to do that.
Well, I think one of the cool things about it too, not to talk about your job for you or something like that, but I mean, I love comics in a lot of ways because they can form connections. Like I've made so many friends from comics and I've never made comics. I've just read them and talked about them. And I think that that's a really powerful thing. But so you went to school for things that were not comics. How did you end up in comics? How did that translate into you making it into becoming an editor in this space?
Yeah, so I went to school for theater and film during when there was a big film boom in Michigan. We spent a bunch of money on a studio that then they decided to cut the tax breaks for, so we spent all that money for nothing. Woo! The MCU movies were supposed to film in Michigan. You're welcome, Atlanta. But I think I just got burnt out from that life. I'm very much an introvert and, being around actors is exhausting. No offense to actors, but it's just like it's a lot for me. And I hit a point in my early 20s where I was just like, well, this was nice. I don't want to do that anymore. And I was staring down the barrel of adulthood life and kind of panicking, freaking out about what it was I wanted to do. And at that time, I had been doing, just like kind of the online pop culture review stuff that, I think a lot of us start out doing with our fandom. And a good friend of mine said to me, he's like, "Well, you like comics. Why don't you just do that?" And it was such a light bulb moment for me because up until that point, I had never considered that, oh, yeah, people make these for a living. Like it's a job that one could pursue. And so, really, at that moment for me, it was not a matter of if, but a matter of how for me. I really had a focus on figuring out where my footing could be in this industry and just how to break down that door. And I mentioned before, like I like to write, but being a writer never really seemed that interesting to me as something that would keep me focused. And I like to draw, but I'm also very lazy. And I think comic artists are the most brutally talented and brutally insane people in the world to do the job that it is that they do. Power to you. I am not that. I don't want to work that hard.
Yeah, yeah. You recognize your strengths and your weaknesses.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I'm like, I know I'm more a podcaster / writer about comics than a maker of comics. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, exactly. But there was this title that appeared on every single comic that I read that really intrigued me, the editor. And, I knew what an editor did in the sense of like traditional publishing and like novels and stuff. It's the editor and the writer, together figuring out the story. But with comics, there are so many other people involved on a creative team, unless you're working with like a Scott McClure cartoonist who does it all, you
Mhm.
know. You have the cover artists, you have the writer, you have, the penciler, the inker, the colorist, the letterer, for the individual book. And then, if you're speaking about a Marvel or DC, then you have this book that has to fit into a greater universe.
Yeah.
How does that work? And I was really fascinated by that. And then I also realized that a lot of the books that I was reading from a Marvel or a DC had the same editor, attached to it. And I thought that was really interesting to me because whatever it was that this person was doing, I was, whether or not I realized it, I was connecting to.
Who was it?
Jordan White.
There you go. Oh, there. That worked well.
It worked out well, right? But Jordan White at Marvel, and then at that time, Mike Martz at DC,
Mhm.
who later became my boss at Marvel. Small world. But I just wanted to know what it is that they do. So I did what any good millennial at the time did, and I tweeted them.
This is back when Twitter was actually very effective at networking.
Yes. Yes. It was much less crazy than it is now. But I tweeted Jordan and I was just like, hey, I'm going to be at C2E2. I see that you're going to be at C2E2. Can we talk? Like, I would love to know a little bit more about what it is that you do. We met at that convention and he sat with me for an hour and I asked all the questions about what it is an editor does. What's the difference between assistant, associate, editor, senior, yada, 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 a day in the life, like all the things. And I left that convention going, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. I do think it's funny. You've kind of tapped into something that I've long thought, which is that I think that this is a nerdy thing to say, but whatever. We're on a comic podcast. I think that editors and colorists actually are the most consistently predictive in terms of what comics I'm going to like. And it's funny that you kind of, you're like, I know I like this Jordan guy. I know I like this Mike Martz guy. And it's funny how that works. I don't think people think about it like that. I mean, I don't think some people think about like editors or colorists at all.
No.
And at the same time, it's like, I know there are certain editors who I'm like, if they are working on a book, I know it's going to be at the very least interesting. And like,
Yeah.
that's a real advantage.
No, it's true. It's absolutely true. I mean, this speaks to my film nerdiness, but I followed producers, if this producer's working on a film, I know I'm going to like it, and I think it's producers and editors, we have very, very similar jobs. So it makes a lot of sense in that regard. But yeah, I left that convention like, this is it. I want to do it. But I knew I wasn't brave enough to like pack up the bags, move to New York City, try and get a job at the bullpen. Like, and I was past the point of being able to get an internship. So I wanted to create my own internship. I wanted to create my own editorial portfolio in order to see, one, if I even can make a comic, but two, do I even like it? Because what if I hate it? And I started putting together what would be my first comic anthology. I put the call out thinking I would get maybe like 4 people interested in my small circle of comics friends. And I ended up getting like 150 submissions for this comic that I had to then whittle down to 17. And I, to this day, will never come up with a better title than this anthology. I think it's the best thing I've ever named. It's Unlawful Good, an anthology of crime.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've always been fascinated by crime comics and the genre of crime. Because I think, I don't know, I could go on to the philosophical existentialism, but I think it's really fascinating. And I spent that summer working with 50 different creators from all over the world to figure out how to make a comic and problem solve and work with a designer and hire a designer and lettering and proofreading and doing the therapy and the egos and the conflicts and all the stuff therein. And fast forward later that summer fall, we're running the comic on Kickstarter. New York Comic Con is coming up, and I go back to the show with an ash can, to kind of have a proof of concept as we're in the final stretch of the Kickstarter. And I run into Jordan White there again. And I said, hey, look what I've done since the last time we saw each other 6 months ago. And he had just gotten promoted, and he, little did I know, he was looking for an assistant. He was going to be hiring an assistant. And he said, would you ever be interested in moving to New York? I said, yes. 2 months later, I'm interviewing with Marvel. 2 months after that, I moved to New York City. I was working for Marvel Comics.
That's amazing. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Love sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and action? Then 2000 AD is the greatest comic you're not reading. 2000 AD has a whole universe of characters from Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog through to Rogue Trooper, Zenith, Shakara, and many more. In every weekly issue, you get 5 action-packed stories from incredible creators including Garth Ennis, Rob Williams, Alex DeCampi, and Dan Abnett. Get a print subscription and it'll arrive at your door every week, and your first issue is free. Or subscribe digitally, get free back issues, and download DRM free copies of each issue for just $9 a month. That's 128 pages of incredible comics every month for less than $10. And all subscribers get amazing offers like money off vouchers and exclusive products. Head to 2000AD.com and click on subscribe now, or download the 2000AD app and start reading today. And now, back to the show. I love that you looked at the editorial landscape, and it's like, let's say it's a swimming pool, and you looked at the shallow end, you're like, what about the deep end? You're like, no. And then you jumped in the ocean because starting with a 50-person Kickstarter as your first editorial project it's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot.
It's a trial by fire.
Yeah, but it made me figure out, while I'm having a full-time job, I had a full-time office job at the time. So I'm doing this on the outset of that. And it really taught me early on systems of organization and communication and tracking that I still use 10 years later to this day, in the comics that I make, because it worked well for me then. So why stop?
We talked before you started recording about how you've worked for multiple you've worked for Marvel, you worked at Valiant, you're working at IDW now. You've done creator-owned books, like you worked on Redlands and Bitterroot and Bog Bodies and Fold Dog and an array of others, I'm sure. But no matter where you're working or what you're working on, communication is at the heart of all of it, right? It's like open, honest, clear communication is going to be the most important tool you probably have in your bag, even if it's a Kickstarter or the biggest book Marvel has.
Yeah, no, it's true. I definitely run my editorial practice on a full no bullshit communication policy. I've seen a lot of different publishers and editors over my career and how they choose to communicate or choose not to communicate with their teams. And I fully believe that we work our best when we have the full reality of a situation. We all have awareness of what is going on, and I think being able to communicate and deliver like bad news or a harsh critique or note from a licensor, but to be able to do it in a way where it is received well and not personally is a skill and an art form and a tact, and to be able to build that trust and rapport with the team, having that trust, that communication is like the most important thing for an editor to be able to have.
Yeah, I mean, that's the positioning thing you were talking about earlier, right? Where it's like knowing who you're talking to and what the best way to communicate that stuff is with them. I do want to ask though, I mean, I mentioned all the different hats you've worn, all the different publishers you've been at. How much variance do you feel like there is depending on the job? Do you feel like there's been a lot, or do you think it's pretty consistent no matter what you're doing?
Like, how do you mean?
So you're at IDW, you're working on licensing stuff. Obviously, there's the inherent variance of the fact you're going to have the licensor that you also have to engage with, which is like, Paramount and Secret Hideout and everything like that. But then at Marvel, you're working with, I mean, I know people love talking about like superhero stuff and like licensed stuff as if they're different species. They're both kind of just licensed stuff.
They're the exact same. Yeah.
Do you feel like there's variance, like significant variance in what you do, or is it pretty consistent no matter where your office is that day?
I think it's pretty consistent. I mean, the personalities at play and the inner office politics or, the licensor politics, of course, those personalities are the biggest variance and figuring out the positioning they're in. But yeah, no, it's you're exactly right. People like to think like, oh, licensed comics are somehow quote unquote less than your Marvel or DC. I hate to break it to you, but even in your Marvel and DC, you still got to get shit approved. Like stuff still has to go up the chain. That chain just might be an office 6 feet next to you, or down the hall, but like it's still going to be sitting in someone else's desk for a while waiting for approval, and you still might be getting notes that you disagree with, along the way. So they're very, very similar.
I've always found that delineation in some people's minds to be really odd because I'm just like fundamentally, I mean, especially if you're a creator, I don't think that there's really any difference. Like for you, you're like, I'm having to get insight from my main person, the editor, and whether or not there's two people on the other side or one person, there's no difference for me.
Yeah, no, it is really, I don't know, it's so weird.
The things you have to engage with, I'm sure, are always unpredictable. But instead of trying to get through all the stuff you've done, because you've done a lot, I do want to ask some overarching questions to help highlight some of the things from your career. These are going to be hard because you have to pick one, but if you can only pick one, which editorial project would you say you learned the most from?
Oh, gosh.
I'm personally hoping for Kieran Gillen and Salvador Larroca's Darth Vader just because I love that comic and I just want to talk about it. But that does not have to be your answer.
No, I mean, that is a great comic. I think what I learned truly, truly the most from is my work on Deadpool. The Jerry Duggan, Brian Posehn, and then, later Jerry Duggan and all the amazing artists we had along the way, Matteo Lilly, Scott Koblish, Mike Hawthorne,
Declan Shalvey?
Declan predated me.
Oh, okay. It was before you.
Yeah, Declan, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Great arc.
Is my favorite Deadpool arc I did not work on. So I get to say that unbiasedly that I think it's the greatest. But working on those comics taught me a ton, both in just figuring out scheduling, because they were not just a monthly comic. It was 18 issues a year.
Oh, okay.
So we would have 3 artists working simultaneously. I built those schedules. That was my job. And so, we would have Mike working on his 5-issue arc and Matteo would be working on the next 5-issue arc, but we would have one-off issues in between every single arc, the 2099 issues that Scott Koblish would be drawing. So I also then had to build the schedule for Jerry to write the scripts to make sure every single artist was fed.
Right, right.
And so he ain't writing those in order. And so props to Jerry to be able to, figure out how to write all of that completely, write issue 1 and then issue 6 and then issue 5 and then issue 7 and then and then issue 2 and then issue 8 and that, like that's insane. And to be able to do that, to be able to learn how to blend comedy and tragedy and character growth so well, which he did so well in his time on Deadpool. And then on top of that, I also got to learn how to improvise and challenge what comics can be. We got to do the fracking issue, which was an activity book issue where we're talking about the dangers of fracking, but Val Staples colored that entire issue with actual crayon, and there's a page that's crossword puzzles. And my first comic that I got greenlit at Marvel was because marketing had decided we want to do another 100-page Deadpool comic. It also solicits in 2 days, come up with a concept to cover a creative team, in that time, go forth. And that's when I pitched the Mercenary of Venice, the entire issue we did in iambic pentameter, written by Shakespearean writer Ian Doescher, where Shakespeare, or where Deadpool gets sucked into Shakespeare land. And we got to do that because that was the idea we had and put it together. And we had our entire Spanish issue that we then Google translated back into English to show American readers how poorly the rest of the world reads the Marvel translations, because they would always complain about it. And so like doing that really taught me that like, oh, comics can be so much more than just 20 pages of superhero action in a book. And I really think having those as some of my earliest challenges really helped inspire and encourage like me to really think out of the box with what I do to this day.
I mean, it seems like you learned a lot on that, because I think one of the things that you really tapped into there that's really important for an editor is like, not to bombard you with more metaphors as to what the editor life is like. It's kind of like planning a cross-country trip where there's like a series of flights. If the writer doesn't get his stuff on time, the artist starts late, and then next thing you know, that flight is late, and then Val Staples is getting his stuff late, Letter is getting the stuff late. And so every time it's, delayed, everything is delayed. You got to keep those trains on track and going on time. Now I'm mixing even more. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, like, that is like the interesting thing is just like you were saying about Jerry needing to keep the artist fed. It seems crazy to do like issue 1 and issue 8 or whatever at the same time, but it's the only way to not cause delays throughout the entire system.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. It's my job to make sure everyone has an environment in order to do their very best work, and that includes getting paid on time.
Right.
Right? And not waiting for work. And can you imagine if it's like, oh, sorry, you have to wait 6 more months until Jerry finishes writing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 until you get your issues. That's ridiculous. No.
You're also going to be like, I'm going to go find a different job. Like,
right.
Can you put me on something else? All right. A much more fun question. Which project, if you had to pick one, was the most fun you've worked on?
Gwenpool.
I thought you were going to go with the iambic pentameter one. That sounds like out of control. But yeah, I mean, Gwenpool makes sense.
The iambic pentameter one was fun, but it was also like on like such a short leash schedule. Like literally Bruno Oliveira, who drew that issue for us, that issue is only possible because of how fast he drew that book. He killed it. So props to him, great Brazilian artist. But now Gwenpool, because Gwenpool, we got to break all the rules of comics and, getting to be a part of creating a new character. That run is just so special to me in so many different ways, but it was just fun. At that time, comics still do a lot of times, but I think we're getting out of it a little bit. But comics take themselves so seriously, and everything is so dark and grim, and the world is ending, and all of these things, and Gwen just got to be fun.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned Unbeatable Squirrel Girl earlier, and like
Yeah.
that's one of the, sometimes when you get those books, they shouldn't feel like as big of a treat as they do, but they do because they're such a kind of flavor changer.
Yeah.
They change up the profile so much. And I do think that kind of stuff, like, you know, there's cycles where it's like
Yeah.
very serious and not as serious and very serious and not as serious. But I don't know. I know you were a big Batman 66 fan, and it is kind of interesting to think about like Batman 66 versus like Matt Reeves, the Batman. Could not be much different.
No. No, but I love them both dearly, but yes, they're so different.
All right, last question from this flurry. You do not have to be limited to one, but probably this could be an entire podcast. Who do you think are the people who helped you figure out comics in the industry the most during your journey in comics?
Oh, huge shout out to Jay Foskett. He's my number one, hands down.
Yeah.
Jay Foskett. He is a cartoonist who is also from Michigan, who I met because his ex-wife was actually a classmate of mine, and we did a show together, and that's how I met Jay. And Jay was, drawing everyone all the time, and I was like, "Ooh, art, comics." But Jay was my biggest cheerleader starting out. When I wanted to start figuring out how to make comics, he was like, absolutely, you should do it. When I wanted to do the anthology, he was like, I will be the first person in it. You should ask this person, this person, this person. He has a great creator on comic called Bodhi Troll. Definitely check it out for all those listening. And he's going to be doing a couple issues of I Hate Fairyland with Scotty Young. So I'm really excited for him on that. But he's been my biggest cheerleader from the very beginning. And then I actually owe a lot too of my editorial education to Scott Alley, previous editor in chief at Dark Horse. I met him at a panel, that same C2E2 that I met Jordan at the Breaking In and Staying in Comics panel. And they ask everyone, who in this room wants to be a writer, and like 75% of the room raises their hand. Who wants to be an artist? And the other bunch of the room raises their hand, and then Scott jokingly was like, who wants to be an editor? And me, front row,
Oh my God.
raises my hand. And afterwards I talked, I go up and talk to him, and he gave me his email to speak afterwards. And we would hop on the phone like once every couple of weeks and like talk comics and story. And if I came up with, creator and differences while I was making my anthology, like Scott really helped me figure out how to navigate some of the earlier editorial problems. And he would blind copy me on like his notes to creators.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I got to see like how he noted a script, how he would note an outline, how he would note layouts and things like that. And I really learned so much from him, and he didn't have to do any of that. There was no expectation of like I wasn't working for Dark Horse or anything at the time. It was just like, here's someone who actually wants to learn how to be an editor. There's like 4 of us in the world. So that was, I owe so much for the kindness to do that.
I feel like he'd probably done that at other panels, and you were like the first person who'd ever raised your hand.
Probably. Yeah. It was like, me.
He's like, wait, what? Is this a prank show? What's happening right now?
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, getting to see that firsthand and getting to see that communication, I'm sure that stuff was very eye-opening.
Oh, huge. I learned a lot of like his metaphors of how to think about a page layout, how to think about how an artist is viewing the page, or some cheats that they might be taking. One of the things I remember him putting in there, it's like when you go to make a happy birthday sign, but you don't quite lay out the whole sign, and so you do a big H and big A, and then you're like trying to squeeze in the rest of it. And he would use that metaphor for like panels sometimes, like
Yeah, that's great.
Artists are like doing a big panel, and then you're trying to squeeze all the other ones at the bottom, and stuff like that. So yeah, just really great stuff early on to start get rattling in my tool belt of editorial thoughts.
So you go through these other publishers, you end up at IDW in 2021, where you're now the group editor for licensing, which includes Star Trek, Mattel, Sega, I think, and presumably other licenses as well.
Yes.
I know Star Trek is a really big part of your world, but that's one thing I couldn't really figure out in my research is how much of your current role is overseeing the licenses overall, and how much is Star Trek oriented?
Yeah, so I run the Star Trek books. The Star Trek books are mine.
They're your babies.
They're my babies. I also oversee all of our dark licenses, all of our horror licenses. So
Okay.
the Event Horizon, Quiet Place, Sleepy Hollow, I oversee all of those as well. I personally edit A Quiet Place and Smile out of those. But as group editor, the role of a group editor is you're overseeing a group of editors. And so, I'm not editing their books. Riley is editing Monster High, Nick Nino is editing Street Sharks, Rocketeer. Like those are theirs. But I'm there to be like the sounding board to, kind of help develop their skill set as editors of how do we build a line? How do we build a launch? How do we come up with cover set ideas? Also, how do we navigate the intricacies of licensors, which I have spent my whole career, doing, and it can be tricky. And I'm also there to step in to play bad cop and Big Brother with licensors when someone needs to, because Mattel has to like Riley. Riley works with Mattel every single day. They don't gotta like me. So if there's something difficult going on, it's easier for me to step in and play Big Brother, so Riley can be good cop and they can like Riley afterwards. So that's a lot of what the group editor side of things are.
Yeah. Well, you got a good crew to work with. Nick Nino,
Yeah.
great guy. I had him on the
Love that
podcast
guy.
last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Him and Jake Williams. I met them
Yeah.
both at San Diego last year, and I was like, these are the two most charming gentlemen. They're great.
Yes, they're great.
I also love the idea that you have to play bad cop involving street sharks, which is like an idea that I'm just like, what does that even mean? I love it. I gotta negotiate the lore of street sharks.
Yes. Well, it's when I get my boat. I'm Brody. It's the crossover with Jaws, and I gotta,
Nice. I like it. 50th anniversary, baby.
Yeah!
We got that reference. We got it in there. There's a big part of me that wants to take a complete aside and just start talking about A Quiet Place, because you still haven't, the creative teams for that is not announced yet, right? I rep very hard for that franchise. I think it's a great franchise.
Yeah. It's so good. It's so good.
I don't think enough people watch A Quiet Place day one. That movie is awesome.
They're all so good. I remember stepping out of the third movie out of day one and like being like, how refreshing is it that we have an original idea, an original concept in film where every single installment is excellent.
Yeah.
But every single installment is such a different film. They're not trying to do the same thing with them. And they're just so brilliant. They're absolutely, absolutely brilliant. And getting a chance to play in that world with the comics is really exciting. I can't wait until we get to talk more about what we're doing with them.
I'm very excited. Like I said, I rep very hard for that. Not just because a cat is one of the main characters for that movie. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. This July, one of the greatest creator-owned comic series of all time begins a powerful new chapter. From Oni Press, return to the Eisner Award-nominated world of The Sixth Gun as creators Cullen Bunn and Brian Hurt reunite for The Sixth Gun, Battle for the Six #1, an extra-sized comic event told across 3 prestige format issues. In the aftermath of the Civil War, a race to claim 6 objects of enormous occult power began, thrusting the fate of humanity into the hands of an ordinary young woman and a hard-nosed gunfighter. Together, they were our best hope to stop Armageddon. They prevailed, but at a terrible price. 3 decades later, at the dawn of the 20th century, the Sixth Gun is about to be reborn anew, as it has been countless times across the centuries. The Sixth Gun, Battle for the Six #1, coming to comic shops everywhere on July 23rd. And now, back to the show. I know you grew up on Star Trek. I do think one of the things that's interesting, focusing on the Star Trek side of the world, is I feel like there's almost, when people are hardcore fans about something, there's almost like a purity test you have to have where if you're going to work on this, you have to be like encyclopedic about everything that ever happened with Star Trek. And like, you have to say, I am a big fan. And you are a fan. Like, you grew up on it. It was something you watched and everything like that. But does it ever feel like you have to kind of have that to be accepted? Because I just find that whole thing to be kind of bizarre.
No, I mean, I don't. I definitely know there are people who do, but I couldn't care less. Like, and part of that is because working with Jackson Lanzig and Colin Kelly, who are the biggest Star Trek nerds in the world, like
Declan Shalvey's going to go fight them now. He's going to fight them.
That's fine. He'll probably lose.
Probably. I don't think Declan would be a great fighter. I don't know that to be sure, but anyways.
But yeah, no. my job is not to be the biggest Star Trek nerd. That's not my job. And so, anyone who thinks that's my job has no idea what my job is. And that's kind of how, I've always viewed it. Oftentimes, even the greatest fans aren't the best people to work on something because they can't separate their own fandom from the story that they're trying to tell.
They're almost like cover artists, not to diminish them too much, but it's like the difference between doing something that's fresh in a genre versus something that like feels like something you've already engaged with.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I will say the day that I dropped a Star Trek reference that Jackson did not know,
Ooh.
I won that day. That was a good day.
Yeah.
That was a really good day. But yeah, no, I don't. I mean, that's what I work with Paramount. That's what they're there for. They're there to know all the Star Trek, so I don't have to know it.
I mentioned Ryan North earlier. I think he's an interesting figure because he's worked on Marvel books that everyone loves, like his Fantastic Four run and his Squirrel Girl run, and he knew nothing about both of them when he went in.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think that that's a weakness. Sometimes having an outsider perspective makes it more interesting. Actually, that's one thing I have to give you. I was looking through the line that you have coming up, and like I read Red Shirts, which is awesome, which is great.
Thank you.
Also, Greg Katzman, shout to Greg Katzman, the senior publicity manager at IDW. He sent me a nice synopsis of everything you're working on. And when I got to Red Shirts and it said limited series, I was like, of course it's limited series. What else is it going to be? But the big one is, I think, Star Trek The Last Starship, which you have with co-written by Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing with art by Adrian Bonilla. And it's a book that is about a resurrected Captain James T. Kirk leading a new crew, a new ship during a very crazy time for the United Federation of Planets. But the thing I like about it is like, it's not just like more Deep Space Nine or more Voyager. It's like, this is a comic doing something new. It's not just more TV show or something like that. And I think that that's something that I think is really appealing about what you seem to be doing is it's like, you're not doing that cover thing. You're like, what can we do that's different? Is that kind of part of your governing approach to what you want your Star Trek line to be?
Yeah, nothing against what was done previously with the Star Trek comics.
Right.
But when I came on, I was given the choice of like what license IDW I wanted to work on because at the time there was a bunch of editorial shifts happening and they were just like, what interests you? And at that time they really wanted me to take over TMNT, but I didn't have any interest. I did the superhero thing for, several years and TMNT was doing fine. Like those books were doing pretty well. Last Ronin, had just come out. They didn't need me. I was really looking for a challenge and Star Trek comics just kind of existed at that point. They were for the hardcore fans who knew all the things, as you said before, who knew all the references and all the deep cuts. And they really felt like, here's the lost episode, right? Here's that lost episode of TNG Mirror War that we never got, and let's do that in the comics. And they felt really, really insular by the fans for the fans only. And I thought that's fine, but it is quite a shame because I think Star Trek is really cool and it has a lot of opportunity. And yeah, and even within comics and nerd circles, it's seen as too nerdy. It's seen as too niche. It's seen as, which blows my mind. And I really wanted to come up with like a way to make Star Trek comics cool for comics readers and have them speak a language that comics readers understood. And eventize them and have high concepts that you don't need to know the entire history of the Borg. You don't need to know the entire saga of Soong and Data to be able to understand it. You can just come in because you like a story about a crew on an adventure,
Yeah.
exploring brave new worlds, and I think that is what is really exciting about what I've been able to do. Things like Red Shirts, things like Last Starship is you don't have to know anything about Star Trek or the lore or to be able to pick these books up and enjoy them.
I read the first issue of Red Shirts and it's great, and it says everything you need to know about that. It also is like, I think the first time I really realized that like people who wear red shirts are aware of the fact that they are likely to die. I never really thought about that. And like the fact that there was a line in there from the person who's the narrator in the first issue, at least, where he's like, I've never met another security member who's over 30
Yep.
like until this mission. And I was just like, that is super fascinating. What it's kind of like that Mickey 17 movie, except for
Yeah.
you don't get resurrected every time.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why I wanted to do one of the fun things we did with the Red Shirts comic is the Federation recruitment variants that we did for it. Because for me, like if Red Shirts die all the time, like if you know you're likely to not make it back from your first mission,
Yeah.
and if you do, you're not making it back from your second. How do they keep getting people to want to be in the security division? Like,
Yeah.
what propaganda is out there that is making this role feel appealing and/or worth it? And so that's where we came up with this great line of, yeah, the recruitment posters, where every single issue gets one.
How much fun is that part of the job where it's just like it's like whether it's coming up with a title or coming up with like variants that connect to a certain title or whatever. It seems like a big part of the job is just like, all right, here's a situation. What can we build from it? It
Yeah.
seems like that would probably be like the whiteboarding, unlimited ideas part of it would be really just a blast at times.
It's really fun. Yeah, we all as fans of pop culture, we sit around the bonfires with our friends, we sit around the school table at lunch in high school, and wouldn't it be cool if, right? And we all pitch our favorite ideas for Spider-Man or Han, Luke, and Leia, and on the great adventures that they would do, or what we would like to see, or what actor would we fan cast in these roles, et cetera, et cetera. And like that's the job. Like that is quite literally what the job is, except I get to make those real.
Right, exactly. Okay, so you have this vision, you know what you want to do. We talked about casting a little bit earlier, but when you're going into developing projects that kind of fit this vision, do you try to find we talked about this artist earlier, but like do you try to find people who match your how do you go about finding people who would be good confederates for this sort of thing, I guess?
Yeah. I have a running list all the time of like artists that I want to work with, writers that I want to work with. I constantly have artists and writers like in my inboxes saying they want to work with me or they want to, pitch on things. And it's an alchemy, like I said before. It's figuring out, A plus B plus C is gonna equal like the best comic ever. And sometimes you get it right, a lot of times you don't. But I don't know, it's a skill, it's a craft that it's an instinct that you put together over time. I'm very much a believer in because of the trench warfare of comics that we spoke about before, like I for my own sanity don't want to put here's a bunch of people I've never worked with ever before together on a project because then I don't know necessarily if everyone's going to hit their deadlines or get along with the licensor or the licensor's notes are going to rub like all the things that could possibly go wrong. I have the saying I give to editors when I'm teaching them casting where it's like only one problem child per book.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like in science. You have unknown variables and known variables. Like, you don't want only unknown variables.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that would be chaos. And so with Last Starship, it's, bringing on Adrian Bonilla, who's never done a Western, never done an American comic before. He's only done creator-owned work over in Spain. But he's someone who I've had my eye on for several years now. We actually worked together on an anthology comic where I wrote a story and he drew it for me and really impressed me on that. An anthology called Let Her Be Evil that came out last year, 2 years ago. But, when we were thinking of artists for this book and we wanted tonally and visually it to look unlike any Star Trek comic that we've done before, I did the thing. I asked Jackson and Colin, who's your vibes, right? Who's your perfect pick of an artist? They sent me a name and I sent them, okay, based on that. Here, actually, I think Declan Shelby was, I think Declan was there, him. And so I sent a bunch of artists back, some that look kind of like Declan, some that look a lot not like Declan, just to like throw them out there. And Adrian was on that list. And, as we said before, Jackson and Colin and I don't always are on the same page with what artists we want for this. But Adrian was who I wanted, was who I was hoping, they would go for. And he was their number one pick.
That's awesome.
So the stars aligned on this one. We were all on the same page.
I mean, I'm sure one day it works out perfectly and another day it doesn't, but at some point it's all going to add up.
Yeah.
You never know who's going to pair very well. But, it's funny. I talk to like creators and editors about kind of how they like put together those ideas of like the people they want to work with and everything. I'm always fascinated by how people work. I think it was James Tynan that told me that he just has like a secret Instagram that he uses to track artists because he's like, this allows me to keep track of my favorites. I could be mistaken about that, but
yeah.
How do you keep track of everybody? Do you just have like a document? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, I love a spreadsheet. I'm a whore for a spreadsheet.
I was going to guess you're a spreadsheet fan. Based on this conversation, it just kind of feels like you have to be.
Yeah, I'm a whore for a spreadsheet, but I have a favorites tab also that I say like a folder on my, on my desktop where I just save links to artist portfolios and websites and everything that I think are interesting. I have a folder in my inbox of every artist who sends me portfolios that I think could be interesting that I just save. And when I need artists, I go through those folders, I go through that list and I just like see who jumps out at me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm following a ton of creators online and, when my brain is fried and I can't think of names, I literally go online and it's the like, who am I following?
Yeah.
Or if like there's an artist I want, but I know I can't work with on a certain project, I go to that artist page and I see who they are following because a lot of times there's like influence and inspiration and all sorts of stuff in that you get to.
I just realized it wasn't James Tynan. It was Rom V that does that. But yes, I mean, that is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But yeah, it's a wide world out there. And I love that you're finding people outside the box. Also, the entire country of Spain is apparently filled with good comic artists. So great place to go. But just a few more questions. You've worked on Marvel superhero books. You've worked on Star Trek. You've worked on Star Wars. I mean, you've worked on other things too, but those are some pretty hardcore fans that have very strong opinions.
Do they?
A little bit. I mean, it's funny. Like, I'm like a Star Wars fan. Like, I've admitted this on the podcast. Of all of my nerd things, I think Star Wars is probably like my number one thing. And it always surprises people when I say that, but it is. Except for I don't have that thing where I'm like very particular. I'm like, I like the stories I like, and I don't like the stories I don't like, and that's fine. I just move on from there. But I'm curious, like, what is it like navigating those fan bases as an editor? Like, do you have to almost live with that outside of your head because you just have to operate under the assumption that you have to do what you know is best for the stories you're telling?
Yeah, I mean, with all respect to, the hardcore fan bases that can be very loud, to them I say thank you for your support so much. Because it's a Star Trek fan, whether or not they love the book I'm announcing, is going to pick it up anyway, right? The super hardcore fans, they're going to pick it up to hate on it. They're going to pick it up to love on it, whatever. So I'm not necessarily making the books for them. I'm making the book for someone who could be a Star Trek fan. I'm making the book for someone who's just, I've really always wanted the story about Beverly Crusher and I've never got it before, I'm making the books for the people who just love comics, who just love this stuff. And of course, you sometimes get the licensors that care a lot about the loud fans.
Sure.
And sometimes are afraid of their loud fans. And I think it's complicated. If we're constantly reacting to the loud fans, you're almost enabling them to continue to be loud. And I think that's a very dangerous line to balance. And so I'm always like very cognizant of that. But to fans, I always like to say and remind the people who make these projects, the TV shows, the movies, the games, the comics, whatever, like we're all people too. I get that you're passionate about your idea or your thoughts or your take on something. But there's some passionate fans, man. They will find every social media handle, every email address, every access to be like, hey, you didn't mention my favorite character. Can you fix that? in the trade?
Probably not.
And I'm just like, no.
Oh my God. I mean, I think that your approach is the right one though, because like you brought this up earlier. You mentioned The Last Ronin. The Last Ronin is a fascinating project because like I have a great friend from college who doesn't read comics, but he loves the Turtles and has never read any of their comics, but he heard about The Last Ronin and ended up buying it in trade. It was the first comic he'd ever read. And the thing is like, if you only focus on the stories that are like the ones that the people already are reading them want, you're not expanding your world.
Yep.
And like, that is, I imagine, a core part of your job.
Yeah. Yeah. It's to explore strange new worlds, right? Like to make it really cheesy. But no, it's it is to push the bounds of what comics can be to me. That's if I played it safe, I never would have done Warp Your Own Way. I never would have done a 200-page, choose your own adventure interactive graphic novel. But I had this idea I really wanted to do, and someone approved it. So
Not to make this too much about Ryan North, but man, that guy was born to do that book.
yeah, that was funny. Getting Ryan on that is like one of my greatest achievements because we had just done the first volume of Lower Decks, which was always only going to be like the 3 oversized issues that it was. And Ryan was like, this is perfect because I'm so busy. He was just about to start doing Fantastic Four. And he's like, I can't, like I couldn't do any longer than these 3 issues. And, I've known Ryan since the Squirrel Girl days, since my time at Marvel. And I know that like if I'm going to get Ryan to do something, I have to pitch him that it's worth his while. And it can never be via email. It always has to be like via conversation, via Zoom. And so I had this idea, I got it approved, and I asked him for, I got an idea, like, let's chat. And he's like, okay. And I was like, I want to do a 200-page choose your own adventure graphic novel. And he just looks at me, tilts his head and goes, huh. And that's how I knew I got him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a choose your adventure story set in Star Trek, which, I mean, I one time asked him at a con for like these videos I was doing, or actually ended up being audio only. I was like, if you could live in any fictional universe, what would it be? And most people had to think about it for a second. He was like, Star Trek. Like instantaneously. And then he had a reason for it. He was just like, it's a utopian society. It's amazing. Like the Federation is fantastic. And I'm like, this isn't like I have thoughts about this. So you found the exact right person.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, last question for you. I think one thing that's interesting about you is the fact that, I mean, you're like many of us. You have your day job, right? You have many hats. You play chess. You keep the trains on track. You do trench warfare. You're a firefighter. You do all these things we've already talked about. But then you mentioned you wrote in an anthology, Letter Be Evil. You do work as an illustrator. I mean, you very recently were at a convention primarily as an illustrator, near as I can tell. Do you think it's important for you to find creative outlets for yourself outside of your day job? Is that something you really need for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, like all creators, my brain doesn't stop ever. It just doesn't. I think that's why when I need to like turn off my brain, I either consume true crime or trashy reality television shows. Those are the only things.
Or you lay on your bed for 30 minutes between Zoom calls.
Or I lay on my bed for 30 minutes in the dark between Zoom calls. My dog's next to me, like, play with me. Yeah, I mean, what I love about getting to do like the creator-owned stuff I do and the writing I do and the art that I do is it is a different part of my brain. That's not the strategy pivot, but like juggle, like blah blah blah. That is my day job. Like I love my day job. I love the IDW and the group editor and all of that. But it is a lot of strategy. It is a lot of planning. It is a lot of hypervigilance and always looking out for the fire and all of these things. And when I get to just draw or work with Christian Ward on his next Image book or work with Jason Aaron on Bug Wars with Mahmood and everything, like that's just fun. That's just play. That's just hanging out with my friends and like telling those fun, wouldn't it be cool if stories without having to deal with any of the company stuff, without having to deal with any of the licensor stuff. It's just making cool shit.
Yeah. Do you think any part of it is like with your day job, and this is not me diminishing your day job by any means.
Yeah.
but like you have to operate within this box where you have to choose from toys within the box. But like drawing and writing and working on creator owned, if you want to say no to something or not draw or not write, you don't have to. You get to choose to do it. Do you think that's part of it?
It's definitely a huge part of it. It really is just like the creative freedom of it all. I was at Marvel for a little over 3 years in its entirety, but I knew after 1 year there that I wasn't a lifer at Marvel. Like I love what I got to do there. It's so much fun there. I love the staff. I love the characters. I love the world, but it is such a and here are the toys and here is a sandbox and now you have to put the toy back and give the toy to this, over here. And but boss said you can't do that with the toy. And it is very constrained. And I knew this just was not for me. I couldn't see myself doing that over and over and over again. It would just be so creatively stifling. And there's a part of me that loves the challenge of the sandbox. Like I thrive in the licensed stuff. I love the chess of that, as we said, but I also love the balance that comes with the creative freedom to just play.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you get the opportunity to play with a variety of toys these days. But Heather, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Star Trek, your career, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with IDW's Group Editor of Licensing, Heather Antos. You can find her on Blue Sky and Instagram and her work in the Star Trek line at IDW. As per usual, big thanks to Deanna Chapman for editing this week's episode. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following it on Blue Sky and Instagram or following me on Blue Sky or Instagram. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Raoul Allen, Omega Slice, John Walsh, Brandon Paul, Aaron Bussey, AC, Simon Birch, Austin, Scion, Megan Marsden, T.S. Luther, Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast, Scott Carpenter, Gus, MK Frygeist, Saunter, Brian, Chris Robinson, David Byrne, Milton Lawson, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Neer Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Dennis Hoffman, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Warren, Klaus Vandeven, Submet Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon Pills, Patrick Brower, Declan Shelby, Dan Carino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kangas, Nick Bennett, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Robert Wilson IV, Andrew Carita, Stefan Hull, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Assey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, Dave Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Cheng, Colin McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abbott, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.